Here.
Hensley,
Here.
Hussey, Kimna,
Here.
Mahalovich,
Here.
Prather,
Here.
Schreiber,
Here.
Ward, Wiseman.
Okay, and at this time, we'll move right into item number 3. Oh, and I got to preface this by, if we can get through planning and zoning tonight, or planning protective services tonight, we will probably not have a Thursday night meeting.
Pressure's on.
So, depends how many questions, we'll see what happens tonight. But we will commence with human resources. Ms. Trope?
All right, thank you. So the total human resources mayor approved budget for FY19 is $312,976.12. Of that, 92% is personnel services, 5% is HR expenses, and 3% is citywide expenses. There's really 3 changes between the budget, or the council approved adopted budget for FY18 and the current mayor approved budget for FY19. Those 3, the first is $500 was added for the Human Relations Commission. $1,000 was removed from professional services. That primarily covers things like citywide training. And then $72 was added for tuition reimbursement for an HR specialist. Just a couple of department highlights that I'd like to point out. The wellness program continues to thrive with over 2/3 of our employees and a nice number of spouses participating. We had almost 200 wellness outreach efforts last year. That led us, most of those outreach efforts are through emails, so that led us to creating a weekly email newsletter that we send out so we can kind of combine things down and limit the amount of stuff that we're throwing in everybody's inbox, but still giving them the information that they need. So that goes out every Thursday morning to all employees. We're currently also researching some adjustments to our incentive programs for 2019. As far as the health insurance, the self-insurance fund ended 2017 with a budget of $631,000. To date, our health insurance is averaging about 86% utilization for 2018. That's a little bit higher than we'd like to see. So we're really watching that. Our dental insurance is averaging a 93% utilization to date for 2018, and really in the 90s is pretty standard for dental. As far as turnover, citywide turnover for FY17 for last year was a nice healthy low at 7.5%. 36% of that was retirements, so that means turnover other than retirements was really just under 5% citywide, so that's really good. We completed 180 recruitments last year with over 2,000 applications for employment throughout the city. As far as pink sheets for this year, in addition to the 2 that were approved, the 2 were the tuition reimbursement and the funding for the Human Relations Commission. Some of the others that we had in there were a learning management system, an electronic performance appraisal system, an awareness campaign, a human resources assistant position, a city match of $25 for deferred compensation for employees, and a citywide internship program. Our top priority continues to be a learning management system, as I do feel as though we're behind our peers in offering citywide training in all areas, particularly in areas like customer service, communication skills, interpersonal skills, supervisory skills, safety topics, diversity and inclusion, harassment, etc. So that's really kind of our budget and a highlight there, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Does anyone have any questions? Councilman Hussey?
I just have a quick one. I'm sorry, you mentioned the stat about the 86% utilization rate. What's the context of that statistic? I'm sorry.
So basically, I mean, now we are self-insured.
Yeah.
Okay, so if you think of it, but we still track it as though we were not. And so if we were to buy health insurance from a company, that would be, we pay in, what we pay in, they we'd be paying out 86% of what we pay in premiums into expenses and claims.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Any other questions? Councilman Mahalovich.
Thanks for going through those metrics. Our citywide internship program, we funded like 2 years ago, right? And I thought
Did we do last year?
Last year.
I think it was last year we
last
funded
year.
it.
Okay. Yes, the
Yeah.
most current summer, okay. And did kind of, we thought that the best way to operate that is every other year? Is that kind of what we'd thought about? And that's why it's not being,
You know, ideally, in a perfect world, if we could do it every year, it'd be great. But when we have tight budgets, every other year is a great alternative.
and so the $18,300 was for how many interns?
That is for 5 interns. The thought is that we could do, that was for 5 interns in the general fund. And then if we had in some of the other funds wanted interns, then they could pay for them out of their budgets. So the 18.3 is for 5 interns, working at $8.50 an hour for 8 to 10 weeks.
So the remaining internships were funded through other departments?
Yeah, if we went above 5 and we had some in some of the other departments, for example, if Parks and Recreation wanted to have one through the program, then they would fund it through theirs.
So if we, will those be in those departmental budgets if they're proposed, or do you know if any are proposed throughout those other budgets? I haven't looked that closely.
We don't have any in those other budgets.
I don't think
That I
there's
know
any in the
about.
other budgets, specifically for an internship program quite like this. But I will say Parks does typically hire interns through some of their seasonal positions. So they will bring in students maybe that go to like the University of Missouri, and they'll work in some of their existing part-time positions and credit that, get internship credit for that through their school.
Okay. Where was that in one of our debates that I learned that one of our interns were hired? Was that brought up?
Actually, there was, in our IT department, an intern that we had last summer was hired full-time, for a full-time position in IT.
Okay. Yeah, I'm in favor of that internship program if we could all, it'd be preserved, but I don't have 18,300 right to recommend at this point, but good.
All right, thank you. Is there any other questions? I see none. Thanks, Mrs. Strope.
Thank you.
We'll move on to the police department. Chief.
Thank you. We have 5 budgets that we manage: Mustang, SRO, 911, Animal Control, and then the General Fund, which is by far the largest. As you know, there are, of course, dozens of line items. I will say, it's my conclusion, I think you'll agree that there's very little difference from last year to this year. It's almost a status quo budget. There were some movement within budgets. In other words, we moved some funds from the general fund to the SRO budget and some funds from the general fund to the 911 budget, because it was just seemed more appropriate to put those monies where they were actually spent. There was some minor increases in some line items, a few decreases in some line items. Certainly would be happy to answer questions about any of that. Otherwise, we would talk about some of the pink sheets.
All right, is there any questions directed for any of those departments within the police department? Do you want to have time to look over? Let's go ahead and go into the pink sheets, and then we can always go back into the other sections if we need to do so.
Yeah, I'd be happy to do that.
right, thank you.
I thought Margie did a good job of explaining why there's not an increase, because we're assuming a new police officer position that would be assigned to the SRO program, but I'll go through that quickly one more time. We paid one officer 100% with city funds this year who was an SRO. We approached the school district and said, would you please pay for 50% of that position as you are the other SRO positions? There was a counter offer to say, yes, we will, but we'd like to add another SRO. So effectively, we took that one half of what we were paying and applied it to the new position. Therefore, it's kind of a wash. There's no increase except minor dollars that might occur from one year to the next anyway, assuming that additional SRO person. And rather than one full-time, we now pay for two half-time positions. That's what would happen. We can't tell what the difference will be because we don't know how much salary the new SRO would be paid, so we can't, accurately depict for you what the difference is, but it's going to be not very much. Probably the tenure of that additional officer, if approved, would be similar to the officers that are already in the SRO program. So any questions about the SRO?
Any questions on the SRO? It's pretty straightforward.
There were some other requests, but we understand for personnel, but as with the rest of the departments, those weren't funded. I think our most critical need is in vehicles. As you saw, we requested 14, 3 unmarked and 11 marked, and there are 2 approved. Of course, the difficulty we have is that's just going to get worse every year. The ones that I believe the 14 that we asked to be replaced this year will have an anticipated 132,000 miles when we replace them next spring or summer.
Did you say 14?
Yes,
Okay.
that's our request. And then if we only receive 2, I can tell you that we will request 21 the next year. And those vehicles, by the time they're replaced, we estimate will have 143,000 miles. Now, that doesn't consider the idle time. Ford Motor Company tells everyone that for every hour of idle time, you can, 25 miles? You can add 25 miles, engine miles. Therefore, for instance, car number 225 shows 96,497 miles the last time mileage was taken. In reality, Sean at Central Maintenance tells you, based on engine miles, there's over 202,000 miles on that engine. It's idled that much. And police officers, we idle a lot. I mean, anytime there's lights on, emergency flashers, you have to have the engine running, and that happens a lot, potentially an hour or 2, who knows, at one call. You could spend most of your shift, idle time. Not saying that's typical, but it does happen. And so the wear and tear on those engines is actually much greater than just those high miles. We got an update from the Missouri Highway Patrol so that I could bring you accurate information. Last week we said, when do you get rid of your Ford utility vehicles? And they said approximately 65,000 miles. Well, and as you see, our anticipated mileage is twice that at over 130,000 miles. It's just, it gets worse every year. There was a point in time before the 2013 revenue crisis where we would replace 9 marked cars every year and rotate them out with about 90,000 miles on them, about 30,000 miles a year. And that was great, but 2013 kind of ruined all that, and we've never been able to recover. And so the vehicle crisis just keeps getting worse and worse. So understand the dilemma the council faces, but that's a reality. And some of you may recall last year I said if we only receive 5 cars, then I'm going to ask for 13 next year. Well, it's actually 14. Beth thinks maybe an unmarked car was added to that. I was off one, but that is in fact what happened. And I can, with I think a real assurity, say it's going to be 21 cars next year, and then we can project out as far as you'd want to go based on average mileage per car times the lifetime of that vehicle. So that's kind of where we are, and be happy to answer questions to my ability anyway.
Councilman Graham?
Thank you, sir. Chief, how many of those, how many cars do you have that's deemed as unsafe, or ones that you have to just strictly park because it's just unsafe for an officer to drive? I know you get to a point to where there's going to be a vehicle that you're not going to put out there because the mechanic says that it's not safe, and I know we're not going to do that, so.
You know, we asked Sean that, and, you know, he can't give us a you know, definitive answer because every car is different. You know, they might be involved in a crash, or maybe they just come off the factory and they're not as well constructed as another. He assures us, though, that as the miles get higher and higher, so do maintenance costs. By the way, we've already spent approximately $195,000 on the 14 that we're requesting to replace, and that keeps getting higher and higher each year that we keep them, obviously. So I think the best we can do is confer with Sean and say at what point does vehicle A, or 115 or 225 or whichever vehicle it is, should we park it. Those, you know, they're just not cars. These are they have lights and, you know, sirens. They run in all kinds of weather, you know, heat, cold, wet. It's hard miles, and in fact the highway patrol, you know, those are 65,000 highway miles. We have 130,000 city miles. It really is critical for us. I don't want to beat around the bush. This is a tough one, and we will be faced with, in my opinion, we'll be faced with parking them.
And Chief, how many officers are assigned per car? Is it that officer just comes outside and they just jump in a vehicle, or is it that there's 2 or 3 or 4 assigned to a specific vehicle? How does that work?
They, in the interest of accountability, we assign 2 officers to each car, and so then as they go on days off, they'll send the car to let the other officer, the second officer, drive it. So now, you know, there's always variations, but generally it's 2 officers per car.
Thank you, Chief.
Thank you.
All right, any other questions? Councilman Holovich?
Has the fleet size increased overall in the last few years?
No, sir. I mean, we could certainly research that to be very explicit, but I do not recall the last time we added to the fleet. I hesitate to say 10 years, but it's been a long time. I mean, maybe 1 car or something like that. I know we reduced the motorcycles by 1. We had the armored vehicle increased. That might be maybe where 1 was increased, but it's pretty much unchanged for many years.
Just in my tenure, I can't remember us increasing the fleet by anything significant. It's always replace.
That's my memory.
And an additional question with regard to your performance measures. Are there any ones of those that you'd like to point to as you're very proud of, and or anything there that directly impacts your budget that we need to look at or come to our attention?
Well, one observation I want to say is it will be at least, in terms of crime, it will be at least 2021 before we can really get a gauge as to whether crime is increasing or decreasing because of the new federal system called IBR, Incident-Based Reporting. So, and we began that April 1st of this year, and what that is where before we would take the hierarchy of whatever the most serious crime was in an incident, we reported that single crime to eventually the FBI. Now they want to know every crime that occurs within an incident. So it's not so far-fetched to think that we could see a 3, 4, 500% increase in crime. Not really, but that's what the figures will say. So 2020 would be the first full year of IBR statistical gathering. And then at the end, well, actually, yeah, 2021 would be the second year, so, or actually, I guess 19 would be the first full year, 20 would be the second, so in 21 would be the first time we could draw a year-to-year comparison, a true apples to apples. So that's something I do want to point out, that we just don't know really where we are, because it's a totally new system, and it exaggerates, well, some would say it doesn't, but it can be considered exaggerating crime in the city, because we don't go by incidents anymore, we go by actual crimes committed. I think that without being too specific, our animal control program has really enjoyed some really good statistical kinds of results in terms of redemptions and adoptions, and we're all, I think over 90% of the animals that we take in, we either return to the owner or we adopt. And I think that's important to note too. We're very successful there. That's probably the highest rate that I'm aware of in a long time, and they work hard to do that, and it's a very popular program. I wish I could tell you how many thousands of people visit our animal shelter every year, but it's a bunch, and that's good. We have 3 different sets, so pardon me, but I'd have to look at all 3 to maybe find those that I think are important, or more important, shall I say. I mean, we seem to be static in our calls for service, maybe a little bit down. That is good. You know, everybody wants to be needed, but it's not good for the community if our calls for service increase. So it's good that we're seeing at least a plateau. Crime has pretty much plateaued. Every year we see a little bit of increase. The next year we seem to see a decrease. And in fact, that's what's happening this year. We're pretty much holding our own. I believe last year there was a little bit of an increase, but crime generally is pretty consistent in the city from year to year. And some cities can't say that, so that's good. I mean, you know, yeah, we'd like to see a decrease, but as I always say, I don't take credit for the increases because I don't want to be blamed for the decreases because I don't want to be blamed for the increases either. But we work in terms of relationships with the community. There's only so much we can literally do to impact crime rates, but we can impact trust and faith in what we do and a willingness to cooperate and those types of things, which has really always been our emphasis. That's what we work at. When you consider we have about 60, let's say approximately 65,000 calls, and then traffic, we receive maybe 20 citizen complaints a year. I think that's pretty extraordinary, because we investigate all complaints. We don't dissuade people from alleging some misconduct or inappropriate behavior. We receive them all and investigate, document, and retain every investigation. I think those are good figures. We're trying to promote feedback. Not a lot of people are willing to just automatically give us feedback in all 3 of our performance measures. We don't always just voluntarily receive it, so we're like reaching out to the fire department, to the sheriff's office, places like that. It's on the web also. If people want to give us feedback, we're promoting those things so that we can increase the numbers and the sampling. Maybe somebody has an observation they could share with me I could address, but
No,
top of my
my
head.
observation is I appreciate the numbers provided and the attention to those, and I think that they show for themselves a department that's functioning to high levels, and so I appreciate these metrics, and I think we should try to find some ways to find more vehicles.
I appreciate, thank you for those words, and we do pay attention to them.
Any other questions for Chief? Councilman Hensley?
Thank you. I have a couple questions on a general fund item, training and education. The mayor's budget has a little over 70,000 for that line item, and I'm curious if you can tell us within that training curriculum if there's training specific to the best ways to effectively interact with crime victims.
Well, each year, the subject matter both remains the same and changes. I don't have the list. It's a pretty comprehensive list. Years ago, I looked and we had committed over 5,000 hours of training just to the sworn personnel in 1 year, if that gives you maybe a context. I mean, we really train heavily in our organization, trying to touch all components of the organization with a diverse number of types of training. Off the top of my head, I'm afraid I can say that we wouldn't want to duplicate the service that the prosecutor's office provides. They focus on crime victims. I believe the last I knew they had a full-time position for that, to do that.
I'm sorry, but police officers interact with people who've been the victims of crimes every day, right?
Yes.
Okay, so even though the prosecutor's office might offer some training in that area, it would also be potentially useful for police
Yeah, and
officers.
I think that if an umbrella is probably under our training that has to do with just interpersonal relationships, being respectful, cordial, equitable, all those kinds of things certainly could be deemed part of that. In other words, we do absolutely emphasize in what manner we interact with our community. And whether it's a victim or a suspect, it's all the same, and that's what we tell our officers. It doesn't make any difference what label you attach. There's a certain way you treat another human being, so that is an emphasis.
Okay, and
CIT training also.
Yeah, we have
I'm sorry,
CIT training, certainly. In fact, we have instructors in
what type of training?
critical
okay.
The mental health issue. That's contemporary now, so much of a problem.
Do you know, is there any training specifically geared towards folks who've been victims of domestic assault or sexual assault?
We have, yes, we have materials that we ensure our officers give to those victims. Guidance, where do you go, what do you do to get an ex parte, or, the assistance that's available within the community. Yes, they routinely hand those out.
And then would that also be helpful towards, for the officers dealing, or interacting with and working with those folks?
Helpful in what manner, I guess?
And how to most effectively and correctly communicate and work with someone who's been the victim of that type of assault?
Well, yes, I mean, they know what they're disseminating. They have to read it to be able to explain it, so that assists them too, if
Okay.
I'm being responsive.
I think so.
Could I just add something to that, Roger? Was this past year the first year of the sexual assault nurse program that you were instrumental in helping get started?
Yes, well, actually, you were most instrumental because you spoke with some of the hospital administrators, and they were very positive in their reaction to return a sane program, a sexual assault nursing program, because we were sending our victims to the lake or Columbia or other places, and so now due to the local efforts and the hospitals working together in unison. We now have our own SANE program, which is not just convenient, but when one has been victimized in that manner, they don't need to be spending 30 or 40 minutes on the road. They need to speak to someone that's empathetic and trained, and so yeah, that's an important program that was returned to us.
And I don't think I heard part of what you said earlier about 5,000 hours. Is that across the entire force, or is that what you said?
5,000 hours.
Yeah.
Of training for just the about 80 sworn personnel.
Okay.
That year, but that has probably been 7 or 8 years ago, and I know we train more now than we did then.
Great. Yeah. So if there's additional training that can be provided, if there are slots in the curriculum for the upcoming session that would focus on helping and working with those types of victims, I think that'd be great.
Noted.
Thank you.
Can I just add to that? I think we also have some in the training budget, is that right? In the, whatever we're calling that other
There's
margin.
there's an
Forget.
additional 17,000 in the police training fund for training as well.
Councilman Fitzwater?
Yeah, I was just going back to the cars very quickly. You put a schedule in there in regards to the maintenance of the cars. Some of them fairly large. Do you know how long, on average, that keeps a car out of the fleet? And does it ever cause a problem because of cars in maintenance?
Well, I'll take the opportunity to credit Sean Stumpy and his staff. They are tremendous to work with. They're prompt in their maintenance schedule. They pay attention to it. They do a good job. They work with us. They cooperate. I've not heard any criticism in that regard, and I can only compliment them. I don't know that we could have a better maintenance program there. I think if they can get those, they understand the importance to us, that's the officer's office, and that's our means of getting to the scenes, and I believe that Sean ensures that those cars are returned to us as soon as practical.
Yeah, just for the record, I wasn't implying there was a problem there. It just seemed like a lot of maintenance, and having had to have my car worked on in the past, sometimes it takes extended periods of time. If you have multiple ones, I was just wondering if that's...
No, I didn't take it
problem
as a criticism. No, I just wanted to point out that I don't think that has caused us problems because of their good work.
Okay.
Certainly it could, but I don't think it does.
There are some departments, though, that have a unique piece of equipment. Public Works comes to mind, where it may be, a sweeper or something related to, wastewater is a little bit different, but there are some of those single-purpose kinds of pieces of equipment that once they're needing to be repaired, they're just out of commission for a while.
If I might too, Beth just told me that she's aware that Sean sometimes and his staff, they know when the officers are off duty, what days they have off, and they'll work on their cars while they're on days off so that when they return, the car is available to them. That's the kind of service we get.
Any other questions for Chief? Seeing none, thank you, Chief.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. This time, we will move into, I believe, the Fire Department. Chief Schofield?
Yes, thank you. I guess we'll kind of follow the same process. We'll start with the line item budgets and go through those. Not a lot of change, but there are a few items that I would probably call your attention to. One of them would be the medical claims and services. And so from the time that we submitted these requests and the time that we received notification of a grant, and while it still has to make its way back to council, I believe it's going to be coming to you here in August. And it is an acceptance of an AFG grant, which allowed us to augment our existing annual physicals. And so the net effect is that we were able to not only add a lot of services to that physical, some baseline blood work for heavy metal testing, which we previously couldn't afford, but then also we were able to reduce that particular line item by $30,000. So that was probably one of the best pieces of good news that we got this year that just worked out in our favor. And again, that's assuming that the council will approve the acceptance of that grant coming up here in August. So we see that as a very good thing. It also provides workout equipment for the fire stations, and that's very, very welcomed in that the equipment that we were provided currently was a grant that we got about 15 years ago. So it's definitely going to be appreciated and well utilized if the council approves that. So working through the rest of the line item budget, I guess I would just entertain any questions that you might have on particular line items, adjustments. We had about a half dozen or so that went down, and then about that many, maybe a little bit more that went up just slightly. So happy to answer any questions on the line items.
Councilman Hensley?
Thank you. Chief, looking at the fire station number 4 remodel, pink sheet.
Yeah, sure.
Hopefully that doesn't throw everyone off balance.
Nope, we can.
Do you have any sort of breakdown about the different parts of that project, what each would cost, what the ADA compliance and bathroom piece would cost versus the remodeling of the kitchen office area?
Happy to talk about that. So part of the design services that we are under contract currently for new Fire Station 2 included a piece for Station 4 just in the design and the architectural services for that project. And so we haven't completed that yet with Architects Alliance. And so the number that you see is kind of a ballpark number that they gave us early on in that process. But the main components would be, right now there's currently just one bathroom in the facility, and it's somewhat limited into its location, and it's kind of by the bunk rooms there, so it's not very publicly accessible. What we would seek to do with this remodel would be to expand the walls so that we're still under the same basic roof line of the current station. We're not adding additional roof line, but there's some areas that are kind of alcove that we could extend the walls out, and we believe that if we did that, we could add a little bathroom kind of there in the front entrance of the building. That would give us a second bathroom, which is critical for a couple reasons. One would be that it'd be more easily accessible to the public, and probably most importantly, with male and female personnel there, it would just allow for 2 bathroom spaces. And that's one of the biggest concerns that we have, and one that we're solving right now at Station 2, but we still have that issue at Station 4. And so that's probably one of the bigger priority pieces. We felt that as we were doing that, there were some other things that needed to be addressed. One would be some additional office space, kind of on the opposite side of that entryway area, reprogramming of some existing walls, interior walls. And then also there is some, we believe, tiles that may contain asbestos in the kitchen. Good time to go ahead and pull them out. Give the kitchen a little bit of an overhaul at the same time. That's been existing there for, I think, about 20 years. So it gets pretty hard use, and it's residential grade materials currently. So 20 years of 24/7 use, it's time for it to be taken a little bit closer look and maybe replaced. We would also seek to do some other things that might add some privacy to the bunk room. Right now it's one open bunk room, and we believe that anytime we can add privacy for our firefighters, both male and female, that's a good practice. And so those are the main components. There might be a few other things for just very, very minor updates, but for the most part, that's what that project would entail.
So the individual components, so if you all get a breakdown of that, I think that'd be helpful to see also.
Sure, and I think we can probably work through that with Architects Alliance probably in the coming months.
I have one more question, Mr. Chairman. On the Hyde Park Burn Building and Training Tower, are you all currently able to use that structure for training?
This last year, we had a private engineering firm do an investigative report on the facility, and it was essentially decommissioned for burning, live burning at that time. We knew that was a major concern, and we have brought it in this process 3 or 4 times in the past, and so we knew that it was a major concern. But it finally got to the point where there was enough water infiltration and degradation of the structure that they said it's no longer really fit for 1403, NFPA 1403 live burn standards. So for us, we're no longer burning it, and we don't allow any of our regional partners to burn in that facility until we can make some repairs or potentially replace the building.
So what do you do instead for that training?
That's a good question, and right now, we have 2 recruits. They're going to Columbia for their recruit program, and we would like to do live burn for our incumbent personnel, at least annually, if not more. What we have is a strategy, kind of a stopgap. We've got a couple of the shipping containers down there that we were able to acquire through a fundraiser, the 5K Foundation, and so we're working on modifying those so that we can use those for 1403 live burn facilities. It's been pretty slow in going. There's a lot of modification that has to occur before they're really ready to be utilized. And even in that current configuration, they're very limited. It's a single shipping container room that we would burn inside of. And so it's much less than ideal, but we're trying to make the most of what we've got currently.
And you mentioned regional partners. How many other fire departments or fire services were using our burn building?
Historically, we had a lot when Summer Fire School was hosted here, and the Missouri Fire Rescue Training Institute decided to move their fire school back to Columbia for a number of reasons. But the burn facility here was a component to that decision as well, having access to excellent training components and features on our training ground. And so we have about a half a dozen or so other regional partners from different county departments, other fire academies that are neighboring counties that come and burn and use the facilities. Some of that we can still do, and we still conduct a lot of training out there. I don't want you to get the wrong impression. We're just limited in terms of the compliant live burn training that we can do at this point.
Thank you, Chief.
Any other questions? I just had one back on the grants. Are any of those grants that you're going to apply for, are they matching?
Yes, the one that we're bringing to you here in August is a 10% match, and so we were able to find savings within our department this year that we were able to apply for that 10% match.
Will any of those need to be budgeted for this coming year, or?
We don't really know yet. So typically what we do is, we go through our grant process where we apply and receive approval to apply and either identify funds or try to set aside funds at that time. And so in this particular case, we were able to find savings within our current budget to offer the match, the 10% match.
All right. Yep. Thank you. Any other questions? Seeing none, we'll just move on. Thank you, Chief.
Well,
At this time, I believe we'll run into Public Works. Or Planning and Protective Services, sorry. No. All right. I did see Public Works on here, so I just read the wrong tab.
Yeah, and the other part of mine's cut off, so I can't really see it. But
So go ahead, please.
Sonny's
Anytime you're ready.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to report that our fiscal 2019 budget at $2,225,000 is approximately $220,000 or 9% less than last year's budget. That is mainly, while we did add an employee, thank you, last year, the budget savings are basically from an MPO grant that we're going to be running through this year. We will probably have to run into next year a little bit with that, with the budget adjustment. And then also we are anticipating some cost savings on our yard waste compost contract. So between that, we're going to be saving that extra amount of money. Would you like me to continue, or is that enough? If it's okay, I'd like to go through, we have 7 budgets. I'd like to go through them one at a time. I'll try to be brief, and if there's any questions, I'll be glad to entertain them as they come up, or wait till the end. It's what you all decide. On the first item, administration, that budget is basically almost identical to last year's. So if there's any questions, I'd be glad to answer those.
All right. Any questions? If you come up with any questions, we can ask those later. We'll just go ahead and move on to the next section. That's right. Okay.
Okay. The next budget item is in our planning division. This budget actually increased some. As you recall, I mentioned an additional employee. We're dividing up, there's 5 staff members in the planning services division. 2.7 of them are being budgeted in current planning, which is the budget that we're at now, and 2.3 in the MPO. So with the shifting of the people around, this one is actually incurring more of the expense than the MPO is. So the budget increase is basically salaries and maybe some ancillary things to support what that extra staff member would do. So with that, I'd be glad to answer any questions on the current planning side of things.
Is there any questions on this section? Seeing none, we'll move on.
Okay, thank you. In the MPO, conversely, the decrease is we have 2.3 employees, and last year I believe we were budgeted 3 altogether, so that has to do with the reorganization of the Planning Services Division. And then we also anticipate not having such a large professional services, contractual services activities go on. So that's where the decrease in the MPO budget is coming from. And I would like to point out that the MPO budget is 80% through a federal grant, and then the county also chips in for 25% of our local match. So in reality, the city's cost is 15% of the total MPO budget. I will continue.
Please do.
The next budget item is our redevelopments and grants. And this one, actually, I've got some pink sheets that I would like to talk about in a minute. But the budget is relatively same. The one thing we did do is you may see under the commercial facade and the rental facade items, historically what we would do is about this time of the year or mid-year, we would take a look at the applications for commercial facade programs and realize that we don't have enough applications for the budget amount and move that into the rental facade. The trouble with that is people that want to take advantage of the rental facade program can't do that at the beginning of the budget year. So for next year, we're kind of dividing that in half, anticipating we're not going to get all the commercial facade applications, but we might be able to get some of the rental facade applications. So there really wasn't a change in the budget. We just kind of partitioned that into what we think there is a need for at the time. And I'd be glad to answer any questions on that also.
Any questions? Please move on.
Not overlooking our pink sheets. You all recall we no longer have our large recycling bins. We investigated what the cost would be to have those reinstituted, so we have a pink sheet in there for $35,000. If there is any discussion on that, I'd be glad to participate. And then the other pink sheet items, basically adding a planner in our grants and redevelopment, which would help with historic preservation activities. And then we're also asking for a bump in the rental facade program. And then the big one really is the 408 Lafayette Street. We're not sure how that's going to turn out. We've not had any luck actually getting anybody to say, yes, you need to pay it back now, or no, you're going to be absolved from this debt. So that is looming. Instead of budgeting it, we're kind of waiting and see. That's going to give us the most flexibility in what we do.
Any questions? Seeing none?
Okay. The next one is entitlement and grants, the Community Development Block Grant Program. This one actually is going to go up some. We just recently got our FY 2018 allocation from the HUD. We put a placeholder number in. The total amount for this budget item is budgeted at $210,000. Our actual amount that we're going to get is roughly $286,000. That difference is going to go increase our down payment assistance program, our homeowner support program, various infrastructure improvements, and also demolition activities. Basically, we're just increasing some of the budget items. This is actually our annual action plan has not been approved by the city council yet. That will be on the next council meeting. And then at that time, I believe Margie, shortly after, we'll do the budget adjustments. I'm not sure if that's after the calendar, the fiscal year starts or not, but it'll be addressed once it is approved. Be glad to answer any community development block grant questions?
Councilman Mahalovich?
I did notice that, and you mentioned it just now, that the amount for demolition went up.
Yes, sir.
Do you know what our backlog is on demolitions? Because it seems to me that we have some Habitat for Humanity requests, and we can't really fulfill those requests, I don't believe, in total.
We have a backlog of approximately 5 houses totaling about $120,000. We're anticipating going out to bid for 827. Right now, we're thinking that's going to cost about $50,000 to demolish. It's in a bad situation. Houses are nearby it. They're really close. It's on a slope. They're going to have to come back from back. It's full of all sorts of hoarder materials and human waste that is going to need special care and taken care of. So that's going to put a big dent. And we're going to try and get that done this fiscal year. So we will still be behind. We have a pink sheet, I believe, in our property maintenance and code enforcement where we're asking for another, I think, $40,000 in addition to what we have in our current budget for next year.
For demolition.
For demolition, yes, sir.
What's
Is that
the
a
address on that
Habitat
again?
house? Oh, excuse me.
827 what?
East High Street. That's the one that, if you recall, there was I think a front-end loader or a backhoe had to go in and scoop out the debris. It's a very bad situation.
Is that a Habitat? Is that going to be?
I'm
Do we know?
not sure where it's going to end up.
Okay.
I don't know.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Seeing none, we'll move on.
Thank you. Environmental health, there's no major changes. This is where the yard waste contract is. That's addressed, and we did request a replacement vehicle, inspection vehicle, for one of our environmental health inspectors, and that was funded in the budget. That's basically kind of making up for some of that difference in the yard waste compost. The vehicles, Public Works will, of course, take the old vehicle and see if it's appropriate to keep it in circulation, maybe find out which vehicle is, really the worst in the fleet, but we do appreciate that being considered as funded. Be glad to answer any questions on this item.
Any questions? No questions.
Okay. Property maintenance. This is where I'll take the opportunity to point out under some of our performance measures. Underneath the workload, I'm really excited to report that we are getting real close to our goal for the year. If you look on number 3 under workload, our 2018 actual number of cases investigated is shown at being 1,977. As of today, it was really 2,860, which is 640 shy of our 2019 goal. So basically, I just want to say our code enforcement people are doing a really bang-up job, and we appreciate the support we've been getting from the council. One thing that why our budget did increase a little bit in this area here is we've asked for some tuition reimbursement for a couple of the inspectors. We also, if you recall last year, we have some software that we're in the process of implementing. There's a maintenance with that of around $10,000. So those two items show a little bit of the increase in the overall division budget. So, and of course, as we write up more code enforcement violations, there's more postage, more letters, more certified mail, just all that ancillary materials and things like that we incur those costs also. We got lots of pink sheets on this one if you want me to go through them. I'll go very quickly.
Sure, if you'd like to.
Okay. We did ask for an inspector supervisor position. We feel we're getting busy enough where it'd be nice to have one of the inspectors actually be a supervisor. We did want to upgrade an administrative technician position to an administrative assistant position. Thank you for the tuition reimbursement. Our inspectors, the two of them that are going to be taking advantage of that, appreciate that. This is where we're asking for some demolition funding increase. Excuse me, I misspoke earlier. We're only asking for $20,000 more. We're also asking for abatement. Our abatement budget's been $15,000 a year for the past several years, but I remember that we are spending roughly about twice that much each year, and we normally pilfer the demolition budget, is what happens, Councilman. In 2016, we spent $37,000. In 2017, $53,000. And so far this year, we spent $25,000 on abatement expenses, of which half of those were to one homeowner. So normally what happens is at the beginning of the fiscal year, we don't jump out of the chute with a demolition. The demolition process takes a while, and by the time we kind of get that going with bids and everything, it's time to pilfer our abatement, our demolition money to pay for abatement money. We haven't done that this year. We took some of the salary savings we had, found the money to pay for that. So we're not anticipating taking the demolition money, but that's what's happened to the demolition money a lot in the past is we have the abatements, they're urgent, they need to be done now. We even, I believe in an email to you and Steve today explaining why some of the weeds went up on some of the properties the last couple of weeks is we ran out of money and we had to stop until we could work with finance to help find the money. So those are the pink sheets and a little explanation of why we're behind on the demos.
I had a question on the abatements. Do we get any of that money back from the residents?
Yes, sir. In 2016, we got back $48,185. In 2017, we got back $51,000. And so far, year to date, and I may be off, we've gotten back $30,000. So most of that money does come back. And if you recall, the administration fee is more in line with what the actual costs are now.
You're welcome. Any other questions? Councilman Grant or Councilman Hussey? Either you.
I just have one question for you, Sonny, since you brought it up. The yard waste compost contract, where are we at on that, and when is that coming back before the council?
That should be coming to the council soon. The contract is up at the end of this fiscal year. We reviewed the responses to the bids, and we are working with one of the respondents to negotiate the final workings of it, and then it will go up to purchasing and contracts for a draft, and we're tentatively going to update the Public Works and Planning Committee next, I guess, well, whenever the next meeting is, if we've worked out everything with the selected provider. So soon, I hope. But I know the dollar amount will be less than what it is now.
This is probably a question more for Steve than Sonny. I've noticed in a couple of the pink sheets, there's been this tuition reimbursement line item that's ended up being funded. Do we have a policy about tuition reimbursement? And I guess secondly, maybe what's the rationale for potentially funding that as opposed to maybe some other capital expenditures that show up?
Yeah, we do have a policy on the tuition reimbursement, and typically what happens is department directors will ask who anticipates attending some of the college classes, and so I kind of felt that those were almost like benefit obligations, and so that's why I funded those. Now I don't think, Gail, correct me if I'm wrong, that we have anything that says a particular degree. We don't have any limitations on the particular degree or the area of study.
That's correct. The only limitation is that it does have to be from an accredited college or university.
Follow-up, do we have any requirement on that employee to remain employed with the city for a period of time after they receive?
We do.
We
I don't know what it is offhand, Gail. It's like
It's 3 years
Yeah.
after the reimbursement is provided to them.
Okay.
So, and if they leave at any point during that time, then they would have to pay back a portion.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, any other questions? Seeing none, we'll move on.
We got one more division to go through.
Sure.
Building Inspection and Regulations Division. There's no major changes this year. Actually, I think the budget's within $200 of the 2018 budget that was approved. There's 7 pink sheet requests. Several of those are for additional inspectors, code books. We have 3 vehicles in there that we're requesting, and also new software, which more than doubles our cost savings and what we're requesting for this division alone. But I can go through those individually if you want, but I'd be glad to answer any other questions too.
Is there any questions? Councilman Mahalovich?
I kind of left fire off the hook on this one, but back to your performance objectives. I'm looking at ones that are related to building permits and permitting, and it looks like on page 162 is the closest that comes to the degree at which we're able to allow developers to get their building up and running, and is there a metric? I see this one here is within 15 days. Is there any metric to the degree at which permitting process allows the builder to construct under their time frame, a desired time frame?
In terms of an expedited special process, I know some communities do that, where you may pay to play, so to speak. We basically process an application first in, first out. You come in, you submit an application, and once we provide that back, we'll go to the next one. Now, certainly we're not working on, just one at a time, but different people are working on them at different times. That metric of 50% of those site plans, I think there was only about 12 submitted, and sometimes when you get a large one in, let's say a Special Olympics or the high school, that may take more than the 15 days, 3 weeks, and then so they all kind of start lagging behind a little bit. But we don't have an expedited process like that. It's basically where you are in the queue, and we address you and take care of everybody fairly the same way. Certainly, like we've done with the high school and some other folks, we may issue a permit conditionally. You may do this much, understanding that we're going to get more information in. With the high school, I think we did excavating and some things like that, and we've worked with other builders and owners in terms of partial submission of plans. But it's kind of hard when you're looking at a site plan. You don't want just the comments from, say, Public Works to go out and not planning, because what Public Works says and what planning says, there may be a relationship between those two comments. And I think staff wants to avoid the habit of, oh, here, Mr. Builder, here's one comment, here's another, then all of a sudden they start responding to them, and we're going back and forth a whole lot. It's neater and cleaner to have all the three departments that work on these have all their thoughts at once, and then submit it to the, or respond back to whoever the applicant is. So I'm sorry, I guess no would be the answer.
Are there any of your pink sheet items that are provided to us that you think would enhance the ability to expedite permitting? And
obviously, online permitting is somewhere where we want to go. Some of the software that's in Larry's budget there would cover that. I also hope that the software suite that we're pursuing with code enforcement, we wanted to be sure that when we spec that out, that it had the ability to, the software could do online permitting for the building world, not just code enforcement world, but also accept money online, interface in with our Springbrook software, go above and beyond what we needed for code enforcement, but might be able to migrate it into the building and site plan realm of things. So we were trying to have foresight into what we needed when we spec that software out.
okay, thank you.
All right, do we have any other questions? Do you have anything else for us?
Nope, just thank you.
Well, thank you, Mr. Sanders. That being, is there anybody else that we wanted to go to? Mr. Kroll? We won't corner him if he doesn't need to.
That was the plan, Matt. We were going to get Public Works later, so.
And do you want to go back on any other sections, cover anything else while we're here? Councilman Graham?
Gail, if you could, I think we've had this conversation maybe last year. Could you give me, just email to me the total amount that we do for tuition reimbursement as a whole for the city? Not just like the different departments, but just as a whole, how much we spend on tuition reimbursement?
Sure. You want for maybe last fiscal year?
Yes.
Okay.
Because it's the same amount that we're requesting for this fiscal year, right?
Not necessarily. If every year tuition reimbursement has to go through a pink sheet, correct? So
There might be some adjustments in several of the departments already have that, that line item in their budget, and if it shifts because different people are taking different classes,
Okay.
if it's not a large amount, it's not going to show on a pink sheet, it'll just be an adjustment to that line item in their budget.
So last year's fine.
Somebody may already be in their program getting
Right.
whatever that degree
Okay.
is, and then some of them may be a new one where somebody's coming new into the program, and so they're an addition.
Okay. Yeah.
So some of them, somebody may drop off, somebody comes up, somebody may leave the city, something like that.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. That's good.
Any other questions? I was going to call on you next anyway, but Councilwoman Ward? I'm sorry. Wiseman?
Back to Mr. Sanders, you talked about the new software, the 7 of 7, that could potentially give us quite a bit of savings. Can you talk about the kind of savings that we would get if we purchased that software?
The software under the building regulations?
The pink sheet
The
item?
pink sheet for 130?
Yeah.
Right now, basically, everything we do in the building regulations process, whether it's a building permit, site permit, whatever, is manual. People bring them in, we have rolls, we have hard copies. We're not doing anything electronically. We're not doing real-time markup where perhaps a fire inspector, public works, and then the planner can actually, redline a drawing electronically and just kind of log out, and their changes are there, so everybody can kind of see it in real time. We work on a copy, we get together, we have meetings and things like that. So there'd be savings like that. There'd also be the ability for an applicant to track their permit application and whatever's related to it online and see where it is. And that may help in these situations where we have the property owner, the developer, the contractors and consultants, and everybody may have one little part or one little component of that. So hopefully that would expedite the actual plan review process and the communication with the applicant. And I would like to say right now that that dollar amount has not been spec'd out necessarily. I mean, it is a pie in the sky best guess.
Mr. Kroll?
I'd just add that when we did the code enforcement piece, we did talk about whether the building or the code was the one that was the more appropriate to do at that particular time, and we had some reasons for doing the code, and I certainly can talk a little bit about that, but we did have that conversation about which one to go with first.
With the code enforcement, with 3 full-time inspectors and 2 part-time inspectors, we were able to, on paper, determine that we would actually gain 3/4 of an FTE in terms of cost savings, because we wouldn't be driving out and coming back as often, which we do right now. So we'd get efficiencies that way. Plus, we can have the letters, our food inspectors actually print out the inspection and give it to the people in the field. We might be able to do that if we have the printers also. But they're going to be out there wireless connected with an iPad, doing everything they do. We are able to leverage our cell phone allowance into an air card allowance and eliminate, some of the technology. So one of the pink sheets we asked for, we just kind of scratched off because we figured out how to do it smartly and not have to pay
I think
for it.
part of it was just the magnitude of being able to implement something that new with the group, so we kind of picked the smaller component.
It was easier. We don't have the financial tie we need. There is no permitting. You don't apply for a permit to have a code violation. So we're taking baby steps.
Well, a question on that. Did I understand that this is an add-on to this software, the existing software?
The software that the IT department is in the process of working with the software company to implement, it does have the capability to basically have a whole back office suite for the building permitting and inspection component of it too. So that's where some savings would be built in also. Ideally, this software we can build on if we choose to do so, sort of in a piecemeal component, so not have to outlay all the money at once, but see what we might be able to do next. And just thinking out loud, I would think the next side of things, once we get it up and going, would be sort of that online permit submittal. So we just make it easier for the customer to submit things electronically, and we'd have them electronic format, and all of a sudden we don't have to worry about all the paper side of things, and then get into the side of of the permitting process and then probably the actual inspection process out in the field using the software.
Councilman Hussey?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would make a motion that we cancel Thursday night's budget meeting.
Second.
Okay, it's moved and seconded. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those against? It passes, so we'll cancel that meeting. And that means our next meeting will be the 9th.
Yeah.
And we will probably be addressing, I'm going to guess, Public Works and Parks. Is that correct? Okay.
Yes.
Councilwoman Wiseman.
I move to adjourn.
Second.
Okay, all those in favor say aye. All those against? It passes.
Your daughter.